Why is the Giveaway Wrangler up on jack stands? Well, today we're installing the Grimm Offroad Heavy Duty Bolt Kit. Stay tuned. And welcome back to another video in the 2021 Giveaway Wrangler build series, where we're building this hella yellow Wrangler and then we're going to give it away. Now today we are installing the Heavy Duty Bolt Kit from Grimm Offroad. This bolt kit replaces the factory bolts in your suspension. And yes, there are reasons why. Let's show you. Now, if you look at the factory bolt, you'll notice that it's threaded all the way down. Now, as your Jeep's taking a pounding off-road, these bolts will stretch and will loosen up over time. And what happens is those threads are bouncing around inside the smooth bore of the bushings that are in your link arms and shocks. Now here's a shock we grabbed out of the scrap bin. If you look down inside what should be a smooth bore in the lower bushing, you can see imprinted threads. And that's from that shock bouncing around on the threads of the bolt. Now here's the Grimm Offroad replacement bolt compared to the fully threaded factory bolt. And the first thing you'll notice is that the Grimm bolt is only partially threaded. That smooth shank slides right through the factory bushing sleeve and gives it proper support. Now, if you look at the ratings on the head of the bolts, you'll notice that the Grimm replacement bolts are the same strength rating as the factory bolts. Now, that Grimm replacement bolt is only partially threaded, and the smooth shank gives good support to the bushing sleeves in the factory links, shock mounts, and track bars. Now, replacing the bolts in your suspension may seem like a big task, but it really isn't that bad. You want a nice flat level surface to do it on, so maybe your garage or maybe even your driveway. You want to do it at ride height. So we suggest putting the vehicle up on jack stands and then removing the wheels and tires so that you can get at the bolts. Now, when we go to replace those bolts, we're going to do them one at a time. The factory bolt's going to come out and the Grimm bolt's going to go right back in, and then when we torque it down, it is torqued at ride height, which is a good thing. Get your Grimm hardware kit open and sort the bolts according to their sizes. The largest bolts are M16, and those are for the front lower control arms. Then you have the long M14 bolts. 4 of them are for the lower rear control arm, and they're going to come with 2 flat washers and a nut. And then we have 4 M14 bolts that are for the upper control arm, and they're just going to use a single flat washer under the head of the bolt and reuse the factory flag nut. Then we have the shorter of the M14 bolts. There's 4 of them. Those are for the track bars. On the frame end, it's going to get double flat washers and a nut. On the axle end, it's just going to get a flat washer under the head of the bolt, and then it's going to reuse the factory flag nut. And then you have your 12mm bolts. The shorter of the 2 are going to go for the lower shock mount, and the longer of the 2 are for the front upper control arm. The axle side is going to get double flat washers and nuts. The frame side is just going to get single flat washer under the head of the bolt and reuse the factory flag nut. So we're going to start up at the front of the vehicle, and the first bolt we're going to remove is for the track bar at the axle. Now we'll move right into the lower control arms and the shock mounts. So let's start at the lower shock mount, and these are going to be 18mm for the factory bolts. Now we'll want to prep the new bolt with a little bit of blue Loctite. Now we can grab a pry bar and just lift up on the shock just a little bit. Factory bolt comes out, in goes the new Grimm bolt. And then the washer and the lock nut. Now the new bolt and nut are 19mm, so swap up to 19mm socket and wrench. We're just going to get it tight. We will go back over and re-torque all the bolts once we're done. Moving down to the lower control arm, we're going to start on the frame end, and on the bolt head is a 21mm, and on the nut it's 24mm. And again, we're just doing these one at a time so we can move that bolt right out. Take the 16mm Grimm bolt, again with the blue Loctite. And then a washer on the back side and the new locking nut. Now we're going to move up to 24mm at the bolt head, and the nut is 24mm also. Again, the new Grimm bolt, flat washer, blue Loctite, and then the washer and the lock nut. And again, we're just running them in tight, and we will torque them afterward. Got all the bolts replaced. And this is one of the longer M12 bolts. And don't forget the washer on the back side. Always use a flat washer on both sides. And then with the new Grimm hardware, we're going to move up to 19mm. For the frame side upper control arm, we have to remove these heat shields, and they're held in place by two 10mm bolts. There's one here at the bottom and then one directly up on top. Now with that heat shield out of the way, you can see the bolt head. On this vehicle, we've got the 2.0 turbo engine, and that has the coolant pump for the rear battery right down here, and it's going to interfere with getting this bolt out. So we need to remove this pump or just pull it out of the way so that we can get the bolt out of the way. To unbolt this pump, we have a 13mm nut here and a 13mm bolt up here at the top. Now we can grab the pump and just move it up and out of the way a little bit. And then we'll be able to remove that bolt. And there goes the flag nut. Now you see that bolt's going to come out and hit that pump. Grab that pump, push it up out of the way, and then get the bolt out. And the new Grimm bolt, a little bit of blue Loctite. Oh, that's good. Rotate that up out of the way. And then we're going to grab that factory flag nut and slide it right back in its slot. Now before we put that pump back in, we're going to want to push it up out of the way and get our torque wrench in on it. And the upper control arm to the frame is going to be 90 foot-pounds. Now we can set the pump back in place. Install the bolt up at the top and the nut at the bottom. Now moving to the rear, we're going to start with the track bar. We remove the track bar bolt so it's not loading the suspension left or right. And then we'll put the new Grimm track bar bolt in last. Now we're at the lower control arm in the rear. At the frame side, we're going to go 21 millimeter on the nut and 21 millimeter on the bolt head. Now, this is what'll happen sometimes is things are just going to move a little bit, and as you can see, that bushing is no longer lined up with the hole. Now what we can do to help that out is grab a ratchet strap, hook it down underneath the axle, and then up on the frame. Let's go somewhere far enough up that we have room. And just ratchet it far enough forward until you can get the bolt in place. And we've got our flat washer and our lock nut. Then we're going to move up to our 22 millimeter socket and wrench. So now we're in at the upper control arm at the frame. This is also 21 millimeter. And if we look down here, we have our flag nut tail sticking down through the frame. So we're going to switch back to our 21 millimeter socket. And that flag nut can just rest there. Now for this side, we only need the bolt and a single washer. So the bolt will go in a little bit, but looking at it, we need to actually pull the axle back just a little bit so the bolt can slide into the hole. So using our ratchet strap again. So let's talk about the factory flag nuts. Grimm has found in their testing that the factory flag nuts are very high quality, so no reason to try to replicate them, they're just going to reuse them. Now for the axle mounted upper control arm bolt, we've got to get to it from the back side. The UCA bolt on the axle also uses a flag nut, so we just need one Grimm bolt and a washer. And of course a little bit of Loctite. So now when we put that bolt back in, we have to be really careful because we have our wheel sensor line right here. It can get in underneath that washer or that bolt head. So make sure you're careful of that and don't pinch that sensor wire. Now we're moving to the axle side of the lower control arm in the rear. That's going to take a 21 on both sides. And that one's not lining up correctly, so let's see which way we need to go. And it looks like we just need to pull the bottom of the axle forward just a little bit. And there she goes. Took about a click and a half. Then our flat washer and nut can go on. Now we're at the rear lower shock bolt, and just like the front, it takes 18 millimeter wrench and socket. Now we grab a screwdriver and just lift up on that shock a little bit. Now this is the position of the factory bolt. What we like to do is to spin it around and put the threaded section out here towards the wheel. That'll just give it a little bit more protection against rocks. So there's one half of the vehicle. Now we got the other side to do. So word about Loctite. You notice we use Loctite on a lot of things here in the Northridge 4x4 do-it-yourself garage. And that's because we don't want things coming loose. It's an off-road vehicle. It's gonna see a lot of vibration. It's gonna see a lot of abuse. So use Loctite wherever you can just to make sure things don't move around on you. Now, once you have all those bolts replaced, it's time to torque them down. So grab your torque wrench and get ready to go. The M12 bolts are torqued to 90 foot-pounds. The M14 bolts are torqued to 135 foot-pounds, and those monster M16 bolts for the lower front control arms, 215 foot-pounds. So make sure you get a big torque wrench. Once you have all the bolts torqued down, then you're going to want to go back over them and double check. And then we'll follow up with a paint marker. Draw a line across the bolt or nut face and then down onto the bracket. And that's going to do two things. That's going to remind us which bolts we have checked the torque on, and then also for a quick check in the future. If you're underneath your vehicle and you see those lines have moved, you will want to double check the torque on that bolt. Now, are you ready for a heavy-duty replacement bull kit for your Jeep JL or JT? Well, we've got them here at Northridge 4x4. You'll find a link down in the description box below. You'll also find a link to where you can enter to win, well, this Hella Yellow Giveaway Wrangler and the Stingray Giveaway Gladiator. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're not already, and then hit up that comment section. We'd love to hear from you. So until next time, thanks Northridge Nation.